So yesterday I was lifting some weights, I was minding my own business, and a young man approaches me and he says, Andrew, I need some advice. And I say, sure, what's up? And then he goes ahead and he describes to me his situation and he says, I feel like my friends are taking advantage of me. And I respond to him and I tell him, there's no reason to let them take advantage of you. You should go ahead and you should set proper boundaries. To which he retorted and he said, well, isn't that being a little bit petty? Aren't I supposed to be Christ-like? And I responded to him and I told him it's definitely Christ-like to set boundaries. There's nothing wrong with setting healthy boundaries. Even Jesus, during the Last Supper, he told and advised his disciples to go ahead and sell their cloaks so they could buy some swords. To which he responded and he said, oh, that's metaphorical. That's metaphorical. And what was really happening here is he knew what he had to do, but he was trying to advocate that responsibility of courage that was required to go ahead and be confrontational with his friends that he felt were taking advantage of him. And we sometimes have this situation in Christianity where we tend to sort of neglect or talk much less about the more what's associated with being masculine virtues of Christianity, such as courage, such as bravery and honor and magnanimity. I think a lot of this problem has occurred because there are not any longer positive male role models for a lot of guys. Luckily, I didn't have this problem when growing up. My father, he was extremely stoic and he never complained, and no matter what he was going through, and he always taught me to do what needs to be done, no matter how you feel about it. If you feel tired or happy or sad or whatever, it doesn't matter. You have a duty to do as a man, and you do that duty. And I learned it not from hearing him really even talk to me, but from watching him, because that's exactly how he behaved. But a lot of guys, what they do, since they don't have these positive figures, they will look towards these online daddies, these online gurus. You have someone like David Goggins, you have someone like Andrew Tate, you have someone like Jordan Peterson, Elon Musk, and it really depends on the temperament of this young man. If he fancies himself an intellectual and he likes to read and he's a bit more agreeable, he might really be someone who is drawn to Jordan Peterson. If he's really into physical fitness and getting it done and he has a lot of energy and he likes to work out, he might be attracted to someone like David Goggins. If he's really into technology and engineering, he might look up to Elon Musk or making money or anything like this. And so these role models, in many ways, have replaced the sort of tribal leader or tribal role model in a small community that we used to have. And I'm not going to demonize all of these guys. I think there's great things to learn from a lot of these guys. I personally like to sometimes listen to Andrew Tate's speeches. Now, of course, I'm not going to agree with everything he says, but the stuff I do agree with, I find really beneficial. And so it's not so black and white where we can say, okay, all of these fake gurus and all of these, internet daddies are all bad. And you can't go to the opposite extreme and say, oh, they're all good. Obviously, the fact that they even exist demonstrates a deep-rooted problem of the lack of role models in society. And the biggest issue with these role models is a lot of these role models, even though they might teach you some skills or motivate you in a way that might help you reach your goals, oftentimes they have the wrong destination in mind. With someone like Andrew Tate, for example, he's really focused on sleeping with a lot of women. He's really focused on really getting a lot of material wealth. His ambitions are rather shallow and material. And this is true with other people. If you take Goggins, for example, like, okay, nice, you have a healthy fit body, and that's good. You should have a healthy and fit body. You should exercise, but that should not be the end goal of someone's life. You can't put kind of all of this effort and think that something as shallow as a six-pack is really going to grant you the fulfillment, or is even really going to be motivating enough to go through the pain and suffering required that a lot of these gurus will sort of try to motivate you to go through in order to reach the goal. That, in other words, the juice is just not worth the squeeze most of the time. Another issue is that a lot of the self-help can really just be advanced procrastination. And I had this problem, especially in my early 20s, when you would read a self-help book and you'd feel like you were being productive. So you'd read another one and you'd feel like you were being productive. And a lot of this will feel like you're actually doing something, but you're not actually doing something. And it's a huge industry. And like any industry, it's most profitable when you do not leave the industry. They want you to keep reading more books about self-help. They want you to keep buying more self-help stuff, because if you suddenly actually end up helping yourself, now you're no longer a customer. You're not useful for it to them. So there's a incentive to keep you on this perpetual treadmill. But there's a problem in society. There really is. I think, nowadays we even have this word toxic masculinity to describe men. And I think recently, like really recently, it's starting to shift a little bit. But really for the past decade, men have been kind of treated like worker bees. They're asked to be subservient. They're asked to be responsible. They're asked to go ahead and fulfill their duties. But no one asks them what they want for themselves. It's like that meme where they say, oh, people always ask, who is Andrew? What is Andrew? But no one ever asks, how is Andrew? It's that meme. When I was younger, I was having this conversation with my mother at the dinner table, and she wanted to tell me about all of the things that she thinks that women want out of a man. She says, oh, they want him to be kind and nice, and they want him to be responsible, and they want him to be soft with them, and so on and so on and so on. And I sit and I listen to what she's saying. And then when she finishes, I ask her, okay, and then what does the guy get in return? And then she says, oh, that's none of my business. And it's this, I love my mom, by the way. This isn't a slight of my mom. But this attitude is sort of the attitude that has been shown to young men, I think, really, in the past decade. Things are asked of young men. They're asked to be camels of burden, beasts of burden, like donkeys. We're going to load stuff on top of you, and you just go from point A to point B. We don't care about anything else. It doesn't matter. And so this problem has been boiling up, and it's reached its culmination, and a lot of these gurus are a consequence of this. I think someone like Andrew Tate, he says a lot of the things that people feel and want to articulate, but can't. And that's why I think he's become so popular. And the Western churches don't seem to really have much of an alternative. Many of the Western churches, not all, but many of the Western churches seem to be more focused towards the older generations, the boomers. Some churches you walk into and you see it's just a bunch of people over the age of 55. And then you have churches that appear to be like rock concerts, these liberal rock concerts that are all about sentiment and emotionality and waving your hands in the air. And so there's not a lot of alternatives in churches. And churches are supposed to be the place in which we come closer with God, and we attach ourselves deeply to our deep-rooted purpose. The purpose required to go out there and really approach life in a way where life can have the meaning required to endure it. And I think someone like Tate, he noticed that. He noticed that the churches, a lot of them have become more docile. They've become a lot more effeminate in nature, really focus on emotionality and not action, focus a lot more on sitting around and talking and having coffee hour and donut and coffee hour and having kumbaya sessions. And that's why he's like, okay, no, I'm going to go to Islam, because from his perception, he sees Islam as being more patriarchal in nature. He sees Islam as being more masculine in nature. And there's more clear expectations set for men. And there's a bigger chance of, and an expectation for loyalty and brotherhood amongst the men. And I think he feels that way in large part because Islam has not so much integrated culturally into the West as Christianity has. The West fundamentally has Christian roots. And so it's had that time to simmer and become liberalized, whereas most Muslims are in the West are immigrating or second generation immigrants. And so it hasn't had that time to kind of fester into the rot of secularism. And that's why I think he feels that way. But here's the kicker. Ancient Christianity, Orthodoxy, has this it takes care and it's cognizant of the all of the different types of temperaments. And there are a lot of saints who, of course, demonstrated and this masculine virtue and have shown themselves to be phenomenal, the best role models that one can have. I'll name some of my favorites. One of my favorites is Athanasius. Athanasius, being Egyptian, he, during his time, was fighting a heresy called Arianism. And during his time, everybody was against him. That's why in Latin they say Athanasius contra mundum, Athanasius against the world. And he stood his ground, and he had that masculine. I mean, all virtues are accessible to both genders, obviously, but it's often associated with this masculine virtue of fortitude, of standing your ground, of being disagreeable when everyone disagrees with you. And they exiled him over and over again. He was exiled and exiled and exiled. And eventually, history vindicates Athanasius, not Arius, the heretic. And we venerate now Athanasius as one of the greatest church fathers in all of Christianity. Another great example, one that really inspires me, is Constantine, Saint Emperor Constantine, who was a really gregarious emperor. And he was fighting a battle at the Bridge of Milvian, and it was this difficult battle. And he went to sleep one night, and he got a vision. And in the vision, a voice came to him and said, "By the sign you will conquer." And the sign was the letters Chi Rho, short for Christos, which means Jesus. And but he did conquer with that sign. And he took the empire and he unified the empire and he founded the great Constantinople. Masculine, right? Extremely masculine. And so we have these inspirations. And of course, he Christianized the empire and he legalized Christianity in the empire, because before then, a lot of the emperors were persecuting Christians and Christianity was illegal in the empire. You have someone like Philopater Mercurius, who was a Roman soldier. And he had a sword and he was fighting barbarians with it. And he was in this battle, and it was a difficult battle, and he was growing weary in this battle with the barbarians. And then an angel came to him, and an angel said, "Do not fear, Macarius, you will overcome these barbarians." And the angel gave him a second sword to kind of, and in Arabic he's known as Abu Sufyan, the one with two swords. And one kind of resembles his physical strength as a soldier, and one is the divine strength he gets from God. And then when he had those two swords, he went ahead and he conquered those barbarians. And he became renowned as a Roman soldier. And it demonstrates, of course, that virtue of strength, that warrior spirit. And you have St. Moses the Black. St. Moses the Black was actually truly a gangster, big and tall, and he would fornicate all the time. And he was like really like physically fit and strong. And he was a murderer, literally a gangster, but then he repented and he learned humility. And despite his prowess, he was able to really learn what it is to be humble and to be a servant of Christ. And so we have plenty of examples and inspirations of masculinity in the church tradition. And if you go to an Orthodox church, you'll often see a lot of these as icons. You'll see St. George on his horse with his spear, and it's piercing into the serpent, into the dragon. And you'll see Philopater Mercurius with his two swords. And it's still there in the ancient traditions. And so what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that I agree with the theory of history, that history really is something that is best understood when we study the greatest men of history, the greatest men of all time. And they really have the impact in history. I'm Egyptian. I'm a Copt, C-O-P-T. And in my tradition, the patriarchate is in Alexandria. Alexandria, which has sort of that antonym of Alexander. That's because it was founded by Alexander the Great. So all of these thousands of years later, we still feel the impact of Alexander the Great in day-to-day life. People talk about Alexandria every day. They make these gigantic, long-lasting impacts on the world. And so we can learn courage and we can take inspiration by reading their biographies. Read about Athanasius and read his books. Read Constantine, or about Constantine, or these stories of great saints. And, I also take inspiration from some of the secular people like Plato. Plato is one of my greatest intellectual heroes. Or someone like King Baldwin. So, to study the greatest of history, one of my favorite historians, probably the best historian in the modern age, his name is Will Durant. And Will Durant, he has this book. It's called The Greatest Minds and Ideas of All Time. And he starts the book by saying, and he writes this book as an old man, and he says, as I've gotten older, the sort of vigor of youth and the rosy perspectives of youth have kind of dulled in my older years, in my twilight years. But one thing that I still am deeply motivated by, am deeply inspired by, that still puts a twinkle in my eye, is worshiping at the shrines of great men. And now, Durant was an atheist. He was a Spinozan. So I'm not saying we should worship these men, literally. Of course not. But what he's saying is he takes inspiration from their lives and inspiration from their stories. And they like he would allude, put that twinkle in his eye. And so to end the video here, a lot of these gurus, they will sort of promote these lifestyles that are really difficult and they want to push you. And there's some goodness to that. There's some things to be gleaned from that. But usually the problem is the things they push you towards are never really worth it, whether it's buying a car or getting some woman or women or getting a six-pack. All of these things are, shallow and superficial. Now, like I said, while we should be healthy, the real battle of our lives is a spiritual battle. It's a spiritual war. We want to become sanctified. This is the purpose of our lives. And it is only when you have the true battle, the true purpose motivating you and pushing you forward, can you really dignify the struggles in your life.